In taverns and markets, rumors begin to ripple. The king is ill. The king is dead. The king's body has burst in the night. The king has been taken to heaven. The king has been dragged to hell. For a moment, England is silent. It is a silence thick with fear and hope, with memory and regret, with the blood of those who died for this king's ambition, and the breath of those who will now live in his shadow. The guards there stand a little straighter, their hands gripping their pikes, with knuckles white. For they know that a change of kings can mean a change of orders, a change of prisoners, a change of who will walk to the scaffold next. It is said that in the tower, the ravens gather, black against the grey dawn, their calls echoing over the stone walls. The Queen, Catherine Parr, prays for her safety, for the boy Edward, for the realm that shakes beneath the weight of its own uncertainty. The women of the court pack away their jewels, unsure which colours to wear now, which prayers to say, which men to trust, and in the cold, still dawn, England watches the sun rise, pale and thin behind clouds, the light of a new rain that is not yet warm enough to melt the frost that grips the earth. Henry VIII is dead, the man who once laughed as he hunted in green fields, who once danced with queens in candlelit halls, who tore apart a church for a son. What remains are the ghosts of queens and martyrs, the blood on the cobblestones, the prayers that rise from chapels where candles burn for a soul that may never find rest. Who sent friends and wives and enemies alike to the block? Who roared like a lion from his throne? Who once believed himself the sun around which all England turned is gone? What remains is silence, a kingdom fragile as ice, a boy king too young to rule, debts unpaid, alliances brittle, enemies waiting. The frost grips the land, and the sun rises slowly over England, washing the palace towers in pale gold, the dawn after the tyrant's death thin and quiet. And in that dawn, all of England watches, breath held, as the sun rises over a kingdom forever changed. It is winter at Hampton Court, and the frost sits thick upon the branches, waiting. The river outside lies still, dark as the eyes of the king when he drifts into dreams, fever burning through his bloated body beneath layers of fur-lined blankets that no longer warm him, are blackened and swollen, festering with ulcers that weep in the dark hours when the candles sputter, and the air thickens with the scent of rotting flesh. It is said that the once great Henry VIII cannot rise from his bed without help now that the legs that once thundered across tilting yards, the legs that danced in silks with queens and whispered to mistresses. They say that the king dreams of blood every night, that in a hush before dawn he wakes with a gasp that sounds like a drowning man, as if seeing something that no one else can see. Wives standing at the end of the bed reaching for him with pale hands, Thomas More with sad accusing eyes, Cromwell headless standing beside the hearth, all of them waiting. The king who once roared at Parliament, who once laughed as he broke men with a word, now whimpers in the night, and the candles flicker as if the cold breath of the grave is already in the room. Some cross themselves when they hear him. Others shudder remembering the day they saw him rage, the way his face would turn red, refusing to enter tales tucked between their legs as if they sense what lingers there, veins standing out like ropes on his neck, The way he would spit words like curses, each a promise of death. The king's physicians come and go, heads bowed, whispering in Latin words they hope he will not understand. Gangrene, decay, corruption. They know that England trembles with every breath the king takes. That each rattle in his lungs is a drumbeat counting down the final days of a reign soaked in blood and betrayal. When they do speak, it is with trembling voices about leeches and syrups, about purges and prayers. But the king's blood is too thick, his body too ruined, his spirit too heavy. Now, the golden prince is gone, replaced by a swollen, breathless tyrant who smells of death before he has died, clutching at his chest as if the weight of all the heads he has taken is pressing him deeper into the feather mattress that has become his throne. Eyes wide, lips moving without sound, and the frost is thick on the glass. The king stares into the shadows. Perhaps he is speaking to the god he defied, or perhaps to the shadows that gather like crows in the corners of the room, watching, waiting. The air in the room is sour, heavy, and the servants wait outside the chamber, listening to the cough that shakes him until it sounds like bones rattling in a wooden box. Once, Henry VIII was a golden prince, the hope of England, the one who sang, hunted, and feasted while the world watched and admired. That when the chaplain kneels at the bedside, Henry stares with eyes clouded by fever, unblinking. Outside, the frost creeps higher on the window panes, drawing thin, white branches that crack in the first grey light. It is said that he cannot even pray now. Sometimes he calls out in the darkness, Anne, but no one knows which Anne he means. Or if he knows himself, the pain comes in waves that leave him gasping, his hands clutching the sides of the bed, tears leaking from his bloodshot eyes, heads turning when the king's screams pierce the heavy dawn. In the hallway, guards stand in silence, eyes fixed on the stone floor, ears straining for every sound, the coughing, the groaning, the soft, desperate prayers of the chaplain. The women of the court walk softly, their skirts whispering along the rush-strewn floors. In the cold of Hampton Court, the kitchen staff refuses to speak of the strange smells that seep through the corridors, nor of the hounds that whimper outside the king's chambers at night seeking warmth elsewhere, leaving Henry alone with his rotting flesh and restless ghosts. It is said that even the rats have abandoned the king's chamber, slipping away into the dark corners of Hampton Court. In those long nights, when the fire has burned low, the golden prince is gone, and the corpse king lies waiting, breath by breath. The winter deepens, the river darkens. The king dreams of blood. In the hush before dawn, when the frost outside is so thick it cracks under the feet of the guards, the king's chambers are heavy with a scent that clings to the rushes, and the curtains are an unspoken promise of death that no lavender or rose water can hide. But when the candlelight flickers, the embroidered saints seem to turn their heads, and the hunting hounds in the fabric appear to snarl in the gloom. Servants murmur that the king's shadow moves even when he lies still, that the tapestries ripple softly as if something within them is breathing. They hang thick tapestries on the walls to keep out the winter cold. Hunting scenes, saints in glory, the Virgin crowned above all. It is said that at night Henry VIII's wounds open and weep, staining the linens dark, the ulcers on his legs oozing through the bandages. the smell filling the room until even the most loyal attendants must turn their heads and press perfumed cloths to their noses. The physicians are called at all hours, bringing their leeches, their potions of honey and vinegar, their prayers whispered beneath breath. They drain blood from him in the hope of draining away the sickness. But the sickness is deeper than the flesh. The king groans, shifting his massive frame, his flesh bruised and purple beneath the fur robes he refuses to let them remove. He tells the servants to prepare banquets he will never eat, demands to see his armor, to feel its weight, though he can barely lift his arms. He sees himself as a boy again, the bright prince with laughing eyes, riding through fields of green, hawk on wrist, the world opening before him. Then he sees the blade falling on Anne's white neck, hears the final prayers of More, sees the eyes of Cromwell staring before the blow lands. The fire burns low, but the room feels cold, a cold that seeps into the bones and makes the teeth ache. The women of the court who bring trays of broth and wine leave quickly, eyes cast down, crossing themselves as they retreat into the dim corridors. Sometimes the chaplain finds him half asleep, muttering confessions in a cracked voice, begging for forgiveness, then cursing the dead with the next breath. They whisper of the king's screams, of how he cries out for his mother, for his first wife, for the children he abandoned, for the sons who died in infancy. They say the king talks to shadows that stand in the corners of the room, that he waves them away with a shaking hand, calling them traitors, witches, and devils. In these final days, the king's mind drifts like a ship without anchor, washing back and forth through memory. The tapestries ripple in the candlelight, casting strange shadows on the king's bloated face as he stares, unblinking, into the darkness. According to some accounts, the king's bed becomes an island, a kingdom in itself, where he rules with whispered commands, ordering the execution of shadows, demanding the return of the youth that has fled him. He tells the servants to prepare banquets he will never eat, demands to see his armor, to feel its weight, though he can barely lift his arms. The air in the chamber is thick, curling with smoke from the candles that burn low in the cold air, each flame shivering as if afraid. The king's breath rattles in his chest, and sometimes he holds it for so long the servants think it has stopped, only for it to return in a wheezing gasp. That sounds like the dragging of chains across the stone floor. To swear loyalty, to confess their sins before him, so he could judge them, as God's instrument on earth. But when the shadows did not obey, he wept, begging them to leave him in peace. Sometimes the king dreams with his eyes open, staring into the rippling shadows, seeing a court that no longer exists, Jane Seymour's pale hands, young Edward's face laughing before him, Mary and Elizabeth watching from doorways with unreadable eyes. He sees Cardinal Wolsey's bowed head, hears the Latin prayers that echo through the corridors of memory, smells the damp stone of the tower where so many walked their final steps. Although historians are divided, one version says that in these final days the king commanded the shadows to kneel before him. They rustle when there is no breeze, shifting softly, as if the kingdom of shadows within them is restless, waiting. The tapestries hold the cold like a secret, each thread alive with the memories of the king's sins, the laughter of courtiers now long dead. The screams of traitors, the prayers of queens. Within, the king's body continues to betray him, the stench of decay becoming his constant companion. His breath the only proof that the tyrant king still clings to life outside. The frost creeps higher up the windows, turning the world beyond to white silence. And in the shadows of the tapestries, the past waits, silent and patient, for the moment when the king's final breath will release it at last. The corridors of Hampton Court are colder now, as if the stone itself has learned to hold its breath. Every footstep echoes in the vast, draught-heavy halls, bouncing back to the ears of those who walk them. Now they fear his death more than they ever feared his wrath. For with his death will come the unraveling of all their careful alliances, the debts unpaid, the secrets spoken, the revenge long delayed. Courtiers with pale, watchful eyes stand in corners, pretending to speak of hunts and taxes, while their ears strain for the king's rattling breath. They watch the physicians come and go, bearing bloodied cloths and grim faces, whispering of the ulcers that will not close, of the leg that has turned black beneath the bandages, reminding them that they are alive and that the king is dying. They move around him like ghosts, the lords who once feasted beside him, the servants who once watched him laugh, the women who once feared his gaze. But their prayers are not for the king's recovery. They say that once the king awoke during this ritual, catching a boy no older than 15 with trembling hands, and that his roar shook the tapestries. His curses so violent the boy dropped the linens and fled, never to return. They pray for a glimpse of his face, for a sign of how much longer they must wait, for the knowledge of who will rise and who will fall when the final breath is taken. Some say the king has gone mad, that he calls for the heads of his counselors, that he rages at the ceiling and tears the bedclothes with fists swollen and purple. But the boy is kept away, hidden in distant chambers with tutors and nurses, for fear that the sight of his father's rotting flesh and wild, fever-bright eyes will curse him with nightmares that will never leave. Others say he lies silent, eyes wide open, staring at something no one else can see, something that has come to collect its due. It is said that the king's chambers are never empty now. Each morning, when the frost has not yet melted from the courtyard, they gather outside the chamber doors, pressing their hands together, pretending to pray. The king's breath is a clock, and each gasp is a drumbeat that shakes the kingdom's heart. In the evenings, when the candles are lit and the shadows lengthen, the women of the court whisper behind gloved hands. According to some accounts, the king demanded to see Edward, his precious son, the boy for whom he cast aside queens and tore the church from Rome. The king's servants creep into the room to change the linens when he sleeps, working quickly, gagging on the smell that rises from the bed. They say that once the king awoke during this ritual, catching a boy no older than 15 with trembling hands, and that his roar shook the tapestries. His curses so violent the boy dropped the linens and fled never to return. Outside the chamber, guards stand in armor that feels heavier with each passing day. She knows that she, too, walks a thin blade, for when a king dies, even the queen's safety can shatter. It is said she places a hand on the door each night, listening for the sound of breathing, for the silence that will mean her life has changed forever. They watch the nobles rive with forced smiles and gifts of sweetmeats and letters, each hoping to catch the eye of the king's men, each hoping to be remembered when the power shifts like ice breaking on the river. The queen, Catherine Parr, moves through the palace quietly, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, her prayers whispered with urgency. A glimpse of power shifting, a confirmation that the tyrant's shadow no longer rules the halls. In the chambers, the king's breath hisses, the sound of a forge cooling, the sound of a kingdom holding its breath. At night, the candles gutter and die, one by one, and the shadows of the court stretch longer across the cold floors. The people who once bowed deeply when the king passed now lower their eyes, afraid to look upon the ruin that lies upon the feather mattress, afraid that the sight will follow them into their dreams. Although not officially recorded, many believe that courtiers brought small mirrors to the door, hoping to catch the reflection of the king's death in the glass. The kitchens grow quieter as the feasting ends, the cooks whispering of the rationing that will come, the uncertainty that will follow. The hounds in the courtyard grow restless, howling in the cold dawn, sensing the ending before the humans do. In the corners of the palace, the hangings stir as drafts slip beneath the doors, carrying with them the smell of sickness and fear. They wait for the death that will free them, or damn them, or perhaps both. They wait, as all England waits, for the end that creeps closer with each breath, each groan, each whisper from the dying man's lips. And in the cold chambers of Hampton Court, the king lies dying, while the court watches, trembling, fearing, and hoping for the silence that will come. At night, when the frost is thick on the windows and the last candles gutter low, it is said that Henry VIII's chamber becomes a place of haunting, a cold, private purgatory, where the king's sins return to him one pale face at a time, eyes rolling beneath heavy lids as the fever drags him into a world where shadows take shape, and the past refuses to stay buried. The king's swollen body lies beneath for robes that cannot warm him breath. Rasping like torn parchment in the hush of dawn, the king's lips tremble as he whispers, "Catalina, forgive me." But the figure does not move, only watching him with that same gaze she wore in the cold chambers, where he left her to die alone. "Edward," the king gasps, as if calling for the child she gave him, the son he tore a kingdom apart to gain, the son for whom he broke the church and condemned so many to death. Her laughter is soft and broken as she circles the bed, her pale feet leaving no mark on the rushes. Her whispers like wind against the king's ear, reminding him of the day she died and the screams that echoed through the tower. The fever carries him to days long past, to gardens wherein laughed in the spring air, to corridors where Catherine's prayers echoed in the dawn, to quiet moments with Jane Seymour, the pale mother of his longed-for son, who died before he could grow tired of her. The king sees her there in the darkness, her hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer, and he curses her mercy, for in these last days he finds no comfort in the prayers that once justified his cruelty. They say the first to come is Catherine of Aragon, standing near the foot of the bed, her dark eyes filled with the patient sorrow of a woman who waited for justice until the end. Then, in the hush of the night, another shadow steps forward. Anne Boleyn, pale and slim, the dark hair she once tossed over her shoulders now tangled, her neck marked by the memory of the blade. Although historians are divided, one version says she leans close to the king, her head tilting to one side, lips parted in a bloodless smile, whispering, "Do you remember, Harry? Do you remember the promise you made before the axe fell?" The king's groans fill the chamber as he clutches at the bedclothes, the stench of his rotting flesh rising like incense as the ghosts of his queens gather around him. According to some accounts, Jane comes to him too, a soft presence in the darkness, her cool hand reaching for his, her eyes filled with a grief that never left her face in life. They say that Catherine Howard comes, too, dancing barefoot across the cold floor. The girl queen who once laughed in the corridors and wept on the scaffold, pleading for mercy. And there is Catherine Parr, alive but already a ghost to him. The wife who prays outside his chamber even now, while inside. Her husband's mind is a kingdom of shadows. The king sees her there in the darkness, her hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer, and he curses her mercy, for in these last days he finds no comfort in the prayers that once justified his cruelty. Outside, the frost creeps across the glass, each delicate branch of ice reflecting the flicker of the fire, the crackle of logs the only sound against the king's rattling breath. But the shadows remain, their eyes upon him, a silent judgment that no priest can absolve, no confession can wash away. The shadows on the walls grow longer, stretching toward the bed, reaching for the man who once called himself God's anointed, who once tore England in two to satisfy the hunger that now leaves him rotting from within. Sometimes, they say, the king screams in the darkness, calling for the queens who gather around him, demanding they leave him in peace, cursing them for haunting him when he is weak and broken. Servants enter to tend to him, eyes averted, but sometimes they glance up and swear they see shapes. In the corners, the hours bleed together as the king's breath grows slower, each moment stretched thin by pain. Regret and fear, faint and pale the outlines of women who once wore crowns waiting with quiet patience for the king to join them. They remain beside him in the quiet hours before dawn, shadows that flicker with each breath of the dying king, a reminder that even the mightiest will one day face those they wronged. The stench of sickness thickens in the room, rising with the heat of the fire and the cold of the dawn, that the tears carve clean tracks through the sweat on his feverish cheeks, as he calls out the names of the women who once lay beside him, and now stand at the edge of the grave waiting. It is said that in these nights the king begs for forgiveness, but he weeps in the dark outside. The bells of the chapel ring softly for morning prayers, but in the chambers of the king, time has stopped. The ghosts do not leave. In these final days, Henry VIII lies surrounded by the spectres of wives past, unable to rise, unable to flee, forced to face the silent, patient judgment that the living can no longer give him. It is deep winter now. The winds have quieted outside the palace, but within Hampton Court, death stirs. His once mighty frame lies collapsed, bloated and ruined. Where once sat a lion in armor, there is now only the husk of a man who believed himself divine. The king no longer speaks. His lips are cracked and blue at the edges, his breath shallow, barely moving the heavy fur blanket that covers his chest. They come not to flatter, but to observe, to take measure of the moment, to recordeth only in silence the final undoing of a man who ruled by force and fear. They stand still at the edges of the chamber, near the great carved posts of the bed, where the fire burns low, and the air is thick with the sweet stink of putrefaction. He does not sit on a throne any more, but the bed has become one. Beneath the bandages, the leg has ruptured one great, open-wound weeping blackness, soaking the bed with pus and rot. The smell cannot be described, only endured. It clings to skin and cloth and breath. The air around him is thick with decay, and at times, when he stirs, a sound escapes him, not quite a breath, that his soul has begun to leave him in pieces, drifting like smoke from a smouldering fire, that the flames burn smaller when they pass too near his body, that even the dogs refuse to enter the room, growling at the threshold, backing away, tails tucked between their legs, that something ancient and angry now waits near his bed, watching, patient, still. The sacred oil has been prepared, still. The prayers are written and ready. Not quite a moan, but something guttural, something that makes even the most loyal attendant step back, eyes wide, hands trembling. No amount of herbs or perfumed oils can disguise it now. A deathbed throne carved not of gold, but of flesh and fever, rot and memory. The courtiers no longer pretend. The game is over. The king's body has begun to betray him in new ways. Some say that the flesh around the wound has turned to mush, and the skin peels away at the lightest touch. That when a servant attempted to lift his foot days ago, the skin came away in his hand like wet paper. The boy did not return. The firewood snaps. The king groans. They no longer pretend to hold the power to reverse what has begun. They whisper, now, of signs of a black tongue, of cold fingers, of eyes that stare at nothing and blink at nothing. What little wine he drank sits sour in his belly. The physicians no longer speak in confident tones. He has not eaten in days, according to some accounts. The king's belly has swollen with gas, distended and hard, the heat within it unnatural. There are those who say the king is already half dead. They say the chamber grows colder. Though the fire is fed hourly, the priests have come, cloaked in quiet dread, to perform the final rites, though none dare speak them aloud unless commanded. But no command comes. The king will not speak. Perhaps he cannot. He has not named a successor aloud. Not in recent days. Not since the fever began to claim him fully. Not since the blood started leaking from the corners of his mouth like a slow confession. The courtiers murmur outside the door. Who will rise when the king falls? What debts will be collected? What promises kept, and which betrayed? And weeps of silence growing heavier by the hour. That the stench awoke the guards and sent the servants running. That the room was left empty for hours, not out of neglect, but out of terror. That the once mighty king died not with prayers, but alone in a pool of blood, rot, and silence. There are names already moving like cold wind through the halls. Seymour.hertford.gardner.dudley. But inside the chamber, there are no names. Only the sounds of a dying man, of breath that rattles, of flesh that shifts, although not officially recorded. Many believe that when death finally came for Henry VIII, his belly so bloated, so poisoned by infection, burst in the night. Others say he lingered a while longer, slipping in and out of consciousness, calling for Edward, begging to see his son, tears streaming from eyes that no longer saw the world. A lie told out of necessity, a lie dressed in velvet. It is the final toll of a reign that began in gold and ended in rot. But no one will ever know the full truth. The official record is brief and dignified. His Majesty passed peacefully in his sleep. Outside, the snow falls silently over the palace within. The king breathes his last. The bed is still. The silence that follows is not peace. It is relief. It is fear. The king is dead. The king is dead. At first, there is no cry, no ringing of bells, no clash of swords or shout of triumph. Only the silence that follows a storm, a hush so deep it seems even the frost outside has paused to listen. The breath of England itself holds, caught between the last exhale of the tyrant king and the uncertain dawn of what must come next. The windows are opened, and the cold winter air rushes in, scattering the heavy, sour scent, carrying with it the knowledge that the king who once broke England into has become a corpse, subject to the cold like any other man. Inside Hampton Court, the bedchamber is sealed, heavy curtains drawn, the tapestries still. The servants move about with lowered heads, eyes red from the smoke of candles burned through the long night, or from tears they cannot explain. They strip the bed, piece by piece, careful not to gag as they peel away the soaked linens, the stained pillows, the bandages that have fused to flesh. They speak the rites now, louder than they dared before. For the king can no longer command them to stop. In taverns and markets, rumors begin to ripple. The king is ill. The king is dead. The king's body has burst in the night. The king has been taken to heaven. The king has been dragged to hell. They anoint the cooling forehead that once wore the crown. They cross the bloated hands. They whisper prayers for a soul too heavy to rise. It is said that the air in the room is unbreathable, thick with the stench of death, of burst flesh, of rot that has broken free. Who will pay for past loyalties? And who will rise on the back of a dead king? The questions crackle through the palace like the frost spitting the ponds outside. Unseen but unstoppable, the priests arrive, trembling, clutching their books and oils. The courtiers gather in corners, eyes darting, voices low. Who will rule? Who will fall? And beyond Hampton Court, beyond the courtiers and priests, beyond the locked gates, England stirs beneath the pale winter sky. The peasants do not yet know, though some say they wake with a feeling of change, as if the air itself tastes different, as if the crows on the fence posts watch them with knowing eyes.